What is up to the people of the Alcohol Inc. art community? My name is Billy and I'm an alcoholic. That is so rich. No, but what I mean is I love using alcohol-based markers. Ever since I found them and learned the versatility that they bring and the vibrancy and the pop, ooh, I do all kinds of stuff with alcohol-based markers. If you want to follow my journey, I'll go ahead and I'll link my YouTube in the description, Billy Breeze Art. Please check it out. Go ahead and subscribe to me if you want to see future content like this. But if you're not already, please make sure you're following the Alcohol Inc. art community on Facebook and subscribe to their YouTube channel for awesome content in the future. In one of my previous videos, I made a top 5 tips on blending with alcohol markers, but in this one, we're going deeper. In this video, I'm giving 5 in-depth tips on how to improve your blend game and your overall illustrating when it comes to using these markers. I sincerely hope that you get something from this video, and I just feel really privileged to make content for this awesome community, so I appreciate you watching this video. I hope you enjoy. Tip number 1, pick the right paper before trying to blend. So there is a multitude of different papers and notebooks that you can buy that would be suitable to withstand these markers and work pretty well for blending. But let me be clear, you can blend on any paper surface with these markers. Really, it does boil down to preference a little bit, but for me, it's just the texture of the paper. For this tip, I'm going to give you a quick blending example on 3 different brands of paper. Now, I would never recommend a drawing pad intended for pencil as something you should use alcohol markers on, but I'm going to use it in this example to show an example of how these markers can blend on any paper surface. So if all you have is regular old printer paper though or something, do not stress. It actually works fantastic due to the glossy feel to it. Only thing is it bleeds, which personally isn't as big a deal to me as if the colors feel blotchy and saturated as I actually apply them. So I'm going to be using 3 different brands of paper as I stated. I'm going to be doing a light to dark tone blend. It's a Blick drawing paper, 2 different sizes of the mixed media binders, and some Spectrum Noir blending card paper, which is actually the one that is my favorite when I'm trying to make my illustrations appear as though they are a print. But as I switch textures, you'll be able to see exactly how the gradient smoothness changes depending on the texture of the paper. And I'm also going to be using the chisel nib in these examples as a notion that you don't necessarily have to use the brush tip to get that seamless blend. While the brush nib yields easier blending because of the paintbrush-like tip, the chisel works fine too once you get used to it. Okay, so for the first example, I am using 2 shades of red and just going to try to get a little blend going on this first example, which is the Blick drawing pad. Now immediately I noticed that the pad was the paper was super grainy and light. So I can imagine that the alcohol is going to bleed through 2 or 3 pages of this. But really I'm just trying to use this as an example that you can blend even though it may not be the most suitable paper for the job. But as you can see, I just started off with my light shade, then I went through with my dark shade, and then just kind of tried to make a blend there. But I'm not going to be going over any blend details too vigorously right now. I will go over that in the upcoming tips. So finishing up the blend here on the Spectrum Noir cardstock paper, and then the mixed media binder here. Pretty much just wanted to skip through because I didn't want to bore you with the blending, since this tip is actually about the paper and not the blending technique, which we'll get to. But here's a 3-way comparison of all the pages. As you can tell, pretty seamless blend on them, except really for the Blick drawing pad. It was bleeding really heavily, so I couldn't put too much effort into it. But I will say that the XL Mix Media drawing pad and the Spectrum Noir blending card paper are absolutely perfect for these markers. It has the durability required to handle multiple layers of ink, and it could still be manipulated even after the ink is dried. And that goes for really any thick cardstock blending paper. I included choose the right paper as the first tip on this list simply because you could have the most expensive markers in the world, Copic, and while you can still get some kind of blend, it won't appear seamless and as though it's a print. And also, if you have issues with the color bleed and you just rather would not deal with that, there are different brands of paper that negate that. I have never used one, but if you guys know of one, please throw it down in the comments. I'd love to learn about it and maybe pick some up. The illustrations that you're seeing now and previously are all done on some kind of blending cardstock paper, so I highly recommend it, and I hope you check some out. So on to the next tip. Tip number 2 is going to be to solidify your blending technique and your coloring technique, and I'm going to go over that in this clip here. But before I get into any blend technique, I want to make sure that it is clear that you don't have to necessarily blend. If you honestly don't feel like blending something, then don't. These markers lay down beautiful flat colors that almost look digital, but as long as you have the right technique, which honestly isn't hard at all, you can make something ordinary look vibrant and juicy. So for the sake of the first example here, it is always important to understand how to properly apply the alcohol marker before trying to get crazy with blends. So I'm giving 2 different alternative options when it comes to applying it, either like a small circular almost brush stroke, and then in the second oval here I am doing back and forth and side to side motions. So if you're doing it this way, you'll notice on the first pass that it is a little bit streaky. So to fix this, you'll just want to go back over it in the opposing direction, just back and forth the same way. And I'll show that here. So now that we know how to apply the individual colors to get a flat tone, let's go ahead and start blending. So all I'm going to do is just take these 2 tones of blue and I'm going to mix them together. And I'm going to show you how to do that here. But just taking what seems to be my lightest color and darkening the area as much as I possibly can, that way it represents the true depth of the lightest color. Then I go over it with the darker shade here, and as you can see, just filling in that right side, so now that I can go in and create a blend with the lightest color again. So basically here was just light, then dark, then light, and that's how I created the blend. Now it does take a little bit of finesse, but you can continue to work at it. As you can see, I'm kind of going back in with different blend strokes, but this was the final result for this example. Let me show you another one real quick. In this example, we're going to think of these green shades numerically to help with association while mixing colors. When you first start out, it's a good idea to have an understanding of what spectrum of colors you want to use and in what order. It's happened to me many times where I would start working too fast and accidentally blend like a deeper shade in where I didn't mean to, or maybe lose track of my colors. But as you can see here, I'm going in with number 1, my lightest tone, and completely filling the oval so that it's one flat shade. So I've got my lightest shade of green down, number 1. Now I'm just sectioning out the middle with my mid-tone green, number 2, so I can start the process of my blend spectrum from light green to dark green. So if I'm going in order numerically, it starts out with 1, the lightest shade, then 2, then I go back over it with 1 to create the blend between those 2 colors. Then I add my darkest shade of green, number 3, then go back over it with number 2. So it is a little bit of a process, but it's not that complex once you get the hang of it, and I know you will. If you don't have the desired smoothness, on the first go around, you can always just go back over the colors and kind of work it. So that's what it's all about, just practicing and getting an understanding and a feel of how the colors actually mix, and you'll find your own flow and what works best for you. As you get more comfortable, you can add more shades to give your illustrations even more degrees of depth, but start easy and practice. So for the final example, I am taking a light orange and a red and creating a merge between the 2 colors. So I do this by understanding the order in which I do it. I fill in the area with number 1, the lightest shade, which in this case it seems like it's the light orange. Then I take number 2, the red shade, fill it in, then I go back over it with the first shade to blend out the seam, if there is one. I hope that makes sense. And as you can see, I did add a number 3 there, which is just a darker crimson red, which was pretty easy to blend into the other colors. So as I said, as you get more comfortable, you can blend more shades. But practice first and solidify your blending style. Tip number 3 is going to be to work fast and efficient. My approach is always small to medium-sized brush stroke like circles and just to make sure I'm moving at a fluid pace. Move swiftly if you want your ink to lay flat, and for any blends that you make to look seamless. So as you can see from this example, this is just one color, one light green that I colored the first half of first. I let it dry, and then I tried to go back in and finish it, and it resulted in a super oversaturated blotchy oval here. So work quick and efficient, that way you can use the alcohol to your advantage. When the ink is wet, it allows alcohol in the two different colors to work together to layer over each other to become one transition, versus if you work on one area, let it dry, then try to fill it in, you not only risk kind of oversaturating it, but the gradient of your work turns out inconsistent. So be efficient to be effective, and don't be too hard on yourself, because in the end, you're still an amazing artist. What's up? I'm back real quick. So before I jump into the next tip, I just wanted to make it clear that it is super important that before you actually start a project, you kind of have a swatch sheet and kind of figure out what colors you want to use to represent your picture. I spent about 10 to 15 minutes prior to creating something actually just laying out my colors and trying to get a feel for what it is what colors I'm going to be using. Because 99.9% of the time, the color on the cap is not actually a real representation of the color dried on paper. So always a really good idea to start off like that, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. So tip number 4 is going to be to apply your blending technique that you've practiced to your illustrations to get a sense of depth. Having depth in your illustrations or some kind of three-dimensional feel helps it pop out of the page a bit. So what I went ahead and did is I sketched up a little Squidward, and basically I'm just going to split him down the middle to give two different blending examples. So usually Squidward's skin tone in the show is really flat, right? It's one color, but we're going to give him some depth by adding some other shades. So I'm going to explain this example in a simplistic way. Basically, the left side of Squidward will be two main colors, light green and light gray. The light green to give the squid the light greenish flat tone that he has. Then I'll go over his edges on the left side with light gray to give him some pop. You know, something I wish I knew when I started is that gray is your friend. If you don't have a deeper shade, you can use gray and it'll darken up an area. As you can see here, I just used gray on Squidward's head and it gave him some three-dimensional shape. The shade of gray you need to darken an area will totally depend on the base color that you use, so just keep that in mind. And on the right side, as you can see, I used 3 shades and the blending technique that we went over earlier to apply it. Starting with light, then going medium, then back to light, then dark. And I just repeated it until it was smooth. If you keep it simple, you can apply your technique at a much larger scale. Tip number 5 is using the blender pen to your advantage. So, if you've ever seen the colorless blender pen, all it is essentially a alcohol-based marker, but without any color pigmentation. It's all alcohol. When I first heard about it, I thought it was some magical blending pen that would help blend my colors because I sucked at blending, so it would make beautiful gradients, but psych. So as you can see from the example, I did go outside the lines here of the circle a little bit, but now I'm just going back in with the colorless blender and just kind of pushing it back in. What it does is it acts almost like an eraser. It doesn't make it perfect, but it definitely helps backtrack a little bit. So you can take a blender to a small mistake you made to perhaps mitigate the damage so you can fix it. You can backtrack with alcohol markers, and it's the blender that is going to help you do that. It helps fix small mistakes and can even enhance your artwork, like this example I'm showing here of this city landscape where I pretty much just colored in the background with a flat blue and then made some swatches with the alcohol colorless blender. After repeating the process of the horizontal swatches with the blender, you'll see that it gives the background more of a natural cloudy sky effect. So this is one of the many ways you can lighten up an area and easily enhance your illustration. Boom, there it was, an in-depth 5-tip guide on how to improve your blending game and overall how to improve with the markers. So if you found anything valuable out of this video, again, please head over to my YouTube channel and subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. I post other things like this all the time, including speed drawings, customization, that kind of thing. And remember one very important thing. At the end of the day, you are an amazing artist, and all you have to do is practice. You can have all the tips and all of the tools you need, but at the end of the day, if you don't apply yourself and you don't trial and error and practice. But again, my name is Billy. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.